all, welcome back to another unstructured video. We're going to be talking about Bitcoin again as I continue to fall down the rabbit hole, which it seems to consume me for a very long time, several years now really. But it's simply because as you learn more, and particularly, I already had a background in sort of studying, economics, psychology, philosophy. That very much did prime me for, being interested, curious about this sort of thing, and perhaps, better equipped to, understand it, better than had I not had that sort of background. And I think as well, it also ties into my interest in, psychedelics, paradigm shifting, consciousness shifting kind of technologies, because Bitcoin, very much when you get into it, is a paradigm shifting thing, which very much reevaluates how you perceive the world, how you perceive money, how you perceive the economy, the nature of banking. And it's not to say that it's gonna, it depends on, how much intellectual baggage you're bringing to understanding this thing. Because, the more baggage, the more economics education you've had, particularly in, orthodox economics, the kind of stuff that they teach you at universities, that can almost be a sort of impediment to understanding Bitcoin, because as you go through that pathway of education, you assimilate so many implicit assumptions, so many ways of thinking, that you just assume this is just the case because everyone else seems to think it's the case, and there's a kind of, I don't know, assimilating to the authority of who's teaching you. But obviously, when you simply conform, simply accept stuff as it's just a way of things, you intellectually castrate yourself, and that's not to say that we should be questioning everything in a very obsessive kind of way, but I do think it's important to understand the limits of your own conceptual models, and understand that they are just models, and your models should be there to track reality, not the other way around, where reality is tracking your models, because that's the definition of ideology. And that's something that I see a lot in conventional economics. It's implicit ideology sometimes, and you see that particularly in how, in the early days of economics, 100, 200 years ago, it was actually called political economy, and in that, it made quite explicit the intrinsic links between politics, governance, and economic production. But somewhere along the way, political economy got split up into the disciplines of politics and economics, and then you have you hear this sort of the bullshit that you hear from some economists that they're apolitical, they're just impartial, neutral observers of the economy, of the way of doing things, and that's very dangerous, because they become almost blind to their own implicit political assumptions. And likewise, for people who are in the bubble, the echo chamber of politics, they become slightly economically illiterate, and they fail to understand the nuances, the significance of money, and particularly the way it operates in our society. And I guess, obviously, being myself, who, I did a 3-subject degree, which was very interdisciplinary. Obviously, I would be critical of, falling into these sort of narrow disciplines. And there's something that you do see a lot in modern academia, this sort of pigeonholing, this hyper specialization, which can almost create very rigid, slightly autistic modes of thinking, where you get stuck in your ways essentially. And this, I'm noticing as I talk about this, it ties very much into what I've talked about in the past about psychedelics as these very potent psychological tools for inducing neuroplasticity, inducing novel, more holistic ways of thinking to counter those rigid intellectual grooves, those rigid thought patterns that we can fall into. And it's interesting to apply that to the realm of intellectual discovery. Because if you look at in the past, say 400, 500 years ago, with the polymaths, the great geniuses, the Leonardo da Vinci's, the Michelangelos, the Descartes, René Descartes, for example, they were people who were well versed in a wide variety of different fields. Like they weren't specialised, they weren't pigeonholed into one particular thing. And it's interesting to think about, if we create a sort of an educational climate that encourages the hyper specialisation, the hyper pigeonholing into particular fields, is that an optimal way of creating and educating, the people who are meant to lead discoveries in society? Is this adaptive, or can it lead to perverse situations where people are working on very narrow fields and not talking to one another, and sometimes creating stuff which they fail to understand, second order, third order consequences, because they think, oh, this is good within my own narrow mode of thinking. I mean, I'm talking quite abstract here, and I haven't even talked about Bitcoin, but I mean to talk about this sort of the nature of limiting conceptual models and almost sort of intellectual myopia, because it's something that I see extremely prevalent in the way in which the economics discipline has responded to Bitcoin. I'm reminded of, there's this, I don't know what year it's from, but it was basically from this event where they asked a panel of Nobel laureates in economics about their perspectives on Bitcoin. And these, I can't remember the specific. There's a bunch of Nobel laureates who are quite, not to be too ageist, but quite old. I think Paul Krugman was there. There are a few other ones, and I remember reading this article about their responses to it, and it's an interesting how it reads in the article after the question was asked that they all chuckled nervously, and then one of them responded just simply going tulips, and tulips is obviously a reference to a speculative bubble in Holland in the 17th century, and it's funny. It's funny to me now, after having put in the work to actually try and understand what Bitcoin is, how it relates to banking, economics, these deep philosophical questions about what money is, and also how it integrates other kind of scientific discoveries in cryptography. And there were other attempts at creating an electronic cash before that. It didn't come out just out the blue, but you know, from my sort of understanding of it, it's very obvious to me, and it never it it never really when I started to learn about it, it never really occurred to me that this could be a bubble, like, or this is a tulip. This is you know, I don't know. I find it. I guess when I'm when I see something I don't immediately understand, I don't. I think it's a very. I think it's a sign of intellectual egotism if you immediately reject something because you don't understand it. And it's very concerning to me to see, you know, Nobel laureates. I mean, the Nobel Prize in economics isn't a real Nobel Prize. It's a in memoriam of Alfred Nobel Prize. I mean, in fact, economics wasn't really accepted as a proper science for a variety of reasons. But, you know, they wanted a Nobel Prize in economics, so the Swiss, I think, no, Swiss or Swedish, I think it's the Swedish central bank decided to fund one. And that should give you a subtle inclination for what sort of research agendas would be promoted by a prize that is funded by a central bank. And but I'm getting sidetracked here. But basically, yeah, this sort of the immediate rejection of an idea that you don't immediately understand is literally intellectual egotism. It's an aversion to discovering more about the world, and it's a aversion to stuff that you don't understand. And it's you know, I'm talking about this quite a passionate way because it's something I see so much. I don't know, maybe I've just done so many psychedelics that I've fried my brain, so I'm just willing to entertain any weird, wacky idea. But you know, I just can't comprehend how someone could, without reading about it, without putting in the effort to try and understand it, you know, it's just bizarre. It's just bizarre to me. But I don't know. Maybe it's like there's probably, you know, a lot of herd mentality that operates in, you know, particularly economics and the academic bubbles and whatnot. You know, there are sort of prevailing consensuses, and you know, if you're seen as sort of, you know, diverging from that consensus, you're outcasted. You're seen as weird or whatever, and you know, I do see it's quite telling within this article. I mean, I'll link it in the description because I think it's a interesting, insightful article for how old paradigms respond to novel technologies, and I think particularly economics is, from my experience of studying it at university, you know, it's a discipline that's in radical need of new ways of understanding. It's and even my interaction with quote unquote economists, you know, I find them very philosophically naive, to be honest. But I'm not going to get too judgmental. But um, but yeah, what I was saying is that it was quite telling that the article reads that these Nobel laureates in economics were chuckling nervously, which suggests that they kind of understand this is a kind of taboo kind of thing. I think it's like, oh, a bit weird. Why does it have a price value? Why is it going up in price? I don't understand why it's going up in price, you know. And that's a weird thing as well. Like, economists have this seeming reluctance to explain why Bitcoin has a price level at all. They'll look at that and be like, oh, it has no intrinsic value. This is a clear refutation of the efficient market hypothesis, as though the efficient market hypothesis was a really smart idea anyway. You know, look at the GameStop phenomena, for example. But you know, it's I don't know. It's bizarre to me how there's a reluctance to entertain why there would be demand for a monetary asset that has a perfectly inelastic supply schedule, in the sense that it is digital scarcity. And, I think this sort of reluctance is, maybe it stems from how in economics there's not really much philosophical investigation into the nature of money, into what is money, into monetary history over time. I mean, this isn't something that came up in my economics education. Rather, I remember in my economics 1 module that I had at university, you would learn this bullshit 3 equation model of the economy, which is just the epitome of hyper reductionistic thinking, and it's just stupid. But and luckily, I went down the with my degree, I focus more on psychology and philosophy, which they have their own problems at university. But I managed to get out the economics brain rot that you are exposed to, and from what I hear and what I see, it's a lot of slightly autistic, hyper mathematical modelling that is passed off as economic investigation. And I think this is maybe to give a veneer of intellectual legitimacy, a kind of veneer of scientific legitimacy to what they're doing. But if you're not really questioning and tethered to the philosophical assumptions that are orienting your mathematical investigation, you get very detached, and you get very detached from the basic fundamentals. And often the way that paradigm shifts occur is that it's looking at those basic fundamentals, asking the simpler, almost childish questions about your discipline. And these childish questions, particularly as I see them in economics, relate to the nature of debt, the nature of money creation, and the nature of energy as well. Inflation, like I've said in the past, inflation in economics is just taken as an unquestioned, desirable assumption of investigation. It's just seen as, slow and steady inflation is a good thing for an economy, because, it's, I don't know, it's so silly, because as Milton Friedman said, inflation everywhere and always is a monetary phenomenon. It's in principle driven by money creation, and a lot of this stems out of the nature of fractional reserve banking. If you look at the very early history of fractional reserve banking, which is where these banks would become the custodians of gold for people wanting to store their gold at a secure location, and then they realised that they could make money through issuing gold receipts and issuing more gold receipts than they had in reserve, because they knew, or their banking theories suggested that not everyone's going to come to receive their gold on immediately, so they can issue more receipts than they have in reserve. And then there was a whole that does obviously open up to banking failures, bank runs and whatnot, where people come to collect their gold and realise, oh, sorry, we don't have enough here. And there's a whole world of Austrian economics which looks at how bank credit creation, the issuing of more money than one has in reserves, how that does create these inherent bull runs, euphoric cycles of massive credit expansion, and then these depressive episodes, these cycles. And in economics, as I was learned at A levels and stuff, you know, these were called business cycles, and they were just seen as just how economies work, and it's just normal. This is very ordinary, but you know, it's clear to see how the psychology of investing, and investing that is predicated upon debt creation, how that would naturally lead to these sort of, you know, these cycles. These, because you can sort of look at these business cycles as the herd approximation of psychological valuing, you know, of how people, when times are good, people assume times are going to get better, or they're going to stay the same. So you have these euphoric bursts. If you look at particularly, you know, the way that the price movement of Bitcoin over time, you know, you see a very clear, you know, reflection of that. And this is not to say that Bitcoin is inherently a speculative bubble, but if you take seriously the idea that, like I said earlier, about how Bitcoin operates, the supply of Bitcoin operates on a perfectly inelastic supply schedule. You know, every 4 years you have the halving, which makes it even more scarce. And there's often, you know, profound price movements that are associated with the anticipation and response to the halving. And you know, you see obviously these rampant, almost exponential price rises, and then drawdowns, and that, you know, that's something that I want to make a video talking about, how the psychology involved in you know, the investing that occurs with Bitcoin, for example, because there are certainly speculative elements for a lot of the market participants, particularly the ones who haven't done the work into the understanding the fundamentals of the asset. People who get FOMO and just want to fly in because they see it's rising or whatever, that naturally does create a speculative dynamic where it goes blah, and then when people think, fuck, you know, the market's overheating, it's over euphoric, then there's a significant drawdown. And when there is a drawdown, there's the thought that, oh, it's crashing, it's over. But, you know, there aren't any bubbles in history where, well, there's very few where they crash, but then they continue to rise up again, and then they have another one. But obviously the price level, is higher each time. And this, of course, ties into the perfect inelastic supply, the perfect scarcity. You let demand respond to that perfect scarcity, and slowly, you know, the market realizes that, oh, this isn't going away. There's something here, and but, you know, that's the nature of technology adoption. You know, you saw it in, you know, the .com bubble, where there was a lot of massive excitement, almost hysteria over the internet, all these companies, and you know, that created a lot of fervor, which wasn't really based upon fundamental values, fundamental value propositions in many of those companies. And so yeah, I guess sort of, you know, the general holistic summary of all that is to look at how the role of psychology in investing, particularly in market assessment, and as well technology adoption, how academic disciplines respond to new technologies. There's psychology everywhere here, and it's very interesting. So, anyways, I hope you've enjoyed that waffle. It's I enjoy it. I might start actually scripting stuff out, but I kind of just like just thinking on the spot. It's fun and it's easy. I'll just press record and start. But anyway.